The McStay family's murder. On February 4th, 2010, Joseph McStay, his wife Summer, and their two little guys, Gianni and Joey Jr., just packed up and vanished from their home in San Diego. They were escaping from something, or someone, but it was all a bit of a mystery. So the police swung by their place and didn't find anything suspicious. Just an empty house that looked like a family had been living there. There were paint cans in the kitchen from some renovations, a carton of eggs sitting on the counter, and a couple of little popcorn spills in the living room. The family's two cherished dogs, Bear and Digger, were hanging out in the backyard, and there was almost $100,000 sitting idle in Joseph's bank accounts. He had a thriving decorative fountain business. They found the family's SUV in San Ysidro, California, and there's video footage of a family that looks just like the McStays crossing over into Mexico. But after that, the case went cold, and nobody knew what happened to the family. On November 11, 2013, a motorcyclist stumbled upon some remains in two shallow graves, and it was just off Interstate 15 in San Bernardino County, which is over 100 miles away from where the family lived. They discovered a 3-pound sledgehammer that they thought might be the murder weapon, along with some clothing nearby. Interestingly, some of that clothing had the same color the family used to paint their home when they disappeared. On November 5, 2014, after a thorough search, California authorities arrested Charles Merritt, Joseph McStay's business associate. This happened because they found his DNA on the steering wheel of the McStay's car, linking him to the family's deaths. Prosecutors say that Merritt had a gambling problem and that he committed the crime to make some money. They also pointed out that he wrote the house insurance and checks from Joseph's business account 4 days after Joseph went missing. Merritt was convicted in 2019 and sentenced to death in January 2020. He is currently on death row. Bill Sparkman's suicide. On September 12, 2009, they discovered the body of Bill Sparkman, a 51-year-old teacher and part-time census worker. He was found hanging from a tree in rural Kentucky just wearing socks. His hands, feet, and mouth were all bound with duct tape, and there was an identification badge taped to his neck. It was pretty strange, but there it was, Fed, scrawled across his chest in felt-tip marker. They found his body close to a little family cemetery tucked away in a quiet part of the Daniel Boone National Forest in Clay County. He passed away due to asphyxiation. People quickly pointed fingers at residents who had a bit of anti-authoritarian vibe, especially with all the buzz around the political activism group Acorn and its connection to the census. Even though there was a lot of buzz in the media and pop culture about wild anti-Obama and anti-government conspiracy theories, the Kentucky State Police ultimately concluded that Sparkman's death was a suicide. Authorities figured out that Sparkman, who had survived cancer, probably thought his cancer had come back. Sadly, he took his own life and tried to make it seem like a homicide so he could collect a $600,000 life insurance policy for his family. They officially reported that Bill Sparkman had no defensive wounds on his body, even though his hands were tied up with duct tape. They seemed to have some movement, which hints that he might have been able to mess with a rope he was hanging from. It was touching the ground. Davie Lee Niles' disappearance. On October 11, 2006, 72-year-old Davie Lee Niles was hanging out with his friends at a go-to spot, Jake's Bar in Byron Township, Michigan, when he just up and left unexpectedly. That was the last time anyone ever saw him alive. Niles was dealing with cancer and depression, so his family thought he had taken his own life and even published an obituary for him back in 2011. On November 11, 2015, a man was decorating a Christmas tree outside Cook Funeral Home in Byron Center. While he was up on a lift, he spotted something in the pond, and it turned out to be pretty significant, especially since it was 9 years after a man had gone missing. He quickly let the police know. So, when the police got there, they found a car underwater, and inside the driver's seat, there was skeletal remains. They also found a wallet with an ID card belonging to Davy Lee Niles. If anyone had been super curious about what was hiding in that pond, they might have discovered Niles' body sooner. A photo from Google Maps shows something down there at the bottom of the pond. Reyna Angelica Marroquin's murder. In 1999, a new homeowner in Long Island stumbled upon a 55-gallon drum left outside the crossface. So, when they finally opened the drum on September 2nd, you wouldn't believe the surprise everyone had when they found a mummified remains of a young woman inside. She's been in the drum for over 30 years now. She was brutally killed and was 9 months pregnant with a baby boy. Inside the drum were a few personal items like an address book. Police were able to identify the victim as Reyna Angelica Marroquin. She was an immigrant from El Salvador who made her way to New York in 1996, but vanished without a trace just 3 years later. The investigators figured out that the drum had previously belonged to a company in Manhattan called Melrose Plastics, where Marroquin worked before she went missing. So, The company belonged to Howard Elkins. Interestingly, he was also the former owner of the house where they found the drum. The police went through the address book and found a former friend of Marroquin. This friend said Marroquin had been involved with the married Elkins and even got pregnant with his child. So, Marroquin mentioned to Elkins' wife that she was pregnant and was worried that Elkins might harm her. Not long after that, Marroquin just disappeared. When the police talked to 7-year-old Elkins, they let him know that a court order would force him to take a DNA test to find out if he was the biological father to the unborn child. On September 10th, Elkins took his own life by shooting himself. A DNA test done after his death confirmed that Elkins was the father of the child. It seems pretty clear that Elkins was the one who killed Marroquin, but his suicide threw a wrench in figuring out the case for sure. So, there's this eerie last piece that the investigators found in Reyna's address book. This little piece of paper was folded up on the back page, and it read, "Don't be mad, I told the truth." Anastasia's death. It was chaotic and terrible when the Romanov dynasty collapsed on July 17, 1918, after 300 years. Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and their 5 children, Grand Duchess Olga, Maria, Tatiana, Anastasia, and Tsarevich Alexei, were killed in a cellar at Yekaterinburg by a firing squad. After the Tsar and his family's remains were never found, rumors circulated that Anastasia, the youngest daughter, escaped. 2 years later, a strange Berlin lady leaped over a bridge in 1920. Police rescued the unnamed lady from the Landwehr Canal after her suicide attempt failed. She was brought promptly to Dallendorf Asylum, but wouldn't identify herself or provide her documents. Anna Anderson, they called. She remained for 2 years. She stayed silent for 6 months, and many noted her remote aura, strange scars, and Russian accent when she eventually spoke. Another convict told the lady she looked like Grand Duchess Anastasia. Old acquaintance and Romanov servants should meet the lady to prove her identity. Around Princess Anastasia, the media obsessed with Anna Anderson. She stated her Grand Duchess Anastasia status. Once Anderson left the hospital, a mob of Romanov supporters welcomed her. The actual Anastasia's family rejected her claims. When members of the late royal family fought in court over the Romanov inheritance, things became heated. Evidence changed Anderson's royal identification tale, which didn't look good. Anderson's real name was Franziska Skanskowska, a Polish factory worker according to a 1927 newspaper investigation. Franziska was reported missing after an industrial explosion wounded her. With Anderson in Berlin, this event was wonderfully timed. Franziska's brother Felix claimed Anderson was his sister. Anderson calmly repeated that she was Anastasia Romanov, denying all these charges. So Anderson died of pneumonia in 1984. 7 years later, they found 5 corpses in a forest near Yekaterinburg. Romanovs were their match. Rumors seemed accurate for a while. Young Alexei and Anastasia's corpses were never located, but they uncovered 2 more sets of remains in the forest. Researchers suspect these are the 2 youngest kids' corpses. Thus, Anderson's small intestine had been removed after surgery and preserved in the hospital for years. They tested her DNA in the 1990s and found she wasn't linked to the Romanov family. Triple child murder in Chicago. Tragically, in October 1955, the remains of 14-year-old Robert Peterson, 11-year-old Anton Schussler, and 13-year-old John were discovered nude in the Cook County Forest Preserve. They were all bound, gagged, and strangled to death. Robert was found to have 14 knife stab wounds. There was never any evidence, including the boys' clothing, found at the murder site. Remember the era and how little was known about DNA testing and preservation. Actually, the murder scene was probably polluted by cops and the media. It was never even cordoned up. During the investigation, their parents told the police that their sons had gone downtown to see a Walt Disney movie 2 days before they were killed. The authorities tried their best to locate the killer, but no leads were found due to the lack of technology and limited resources. So the murder remained an unsolved mystery for over 4 decades. However, in 1994, when a seemingly unrelated arson investigation at local horse stables alongside the ongoing inquiry into the 1977 disappearance of candy heiress Helen Vures Brock led police down an unexpected path. As the investigations unfolded, authorities discovered shocking connections, with individuals implicating Kenneth Hansen in the brutal murders of the boys 40 years ago. Further investigation proved that Hansen was the one who murdered the boys in 1955. The authorities believe that Hansen took the boys to the adjacent horse stable where he worked. He later tried to pay them for sex, but they refused. He sexually abused and strangled them all. In 2002, Hansen was found guilty of those killings and received a sentence ranging from 200 to 300 years in prison. 5 years later in 2007, he died at the age of 74 in his prison. Cheryl Miller and Pamela Jackson's murder. A long unsolved mystery regarding two missing women from South Dakota has finally been resolved after more than 4 decades. In 1971, Cheryl Miller and Pamela Jackson, both 17, disappeared on their way to an end-of-school party. Despite extensive searches, no trace of the girls or their car, a 1960s Studebaker was found. The case went cold for years until a breakthrough came in 2004 when police re-examined the case, suspecting a classmate named David Lycan, who was already serving time for unrelated crimes. Although he was charged with the murders, the case fell apart after it was revealed that a jailhouse informant had lied. In 2013, a historic drought revealed the car submerged in Burrell Creek near Elk Point, South Dakota. The vehicle was discovered by a local resident, and further investigation led to the discovery of human remains inside. Using personal items found with the bodies, including Cheryl Miller's driver's license and some of their clothing, authorities were able to confirm the identities of the victims. DNA testing helped make a definitive identification. The evidence pointed toward a tragic accident rather than foul play. Forensic reports indicated there were no signs of injuries consistent with anything other than a crash. The car had been in high gear when it crashed, and the victims were found in the front seats fully clothed with no evidence suggesting they had been harmed before the crash. South Dakota Attorney General Marty Jackley confirmed that the most likely cause of death was a high-speed accident. Relatives of the girls, who had waited for decades for answers, expressed relief at finally learning the truth. Although some questions remain about past investigations, local law enforcement officials defended their actions, noting the importance of pursuing all leads. The remains of Cheryl Miller and Pamela Jackson were returned to their families, bringing closure to a long and painful chapter. Christine Ruth Thornton's murder. Almost 40 years after a pregnant woman's body was discovered on a ranch in Wyoming, prosecutors have linked her death to one of California's most notorious serial killers, Rodney Alcala. He's often called the dating game killer since he was a winning ABC primetime game show contestant. While he was causing chaos, he faced charges for the murder of Christine Ruth Thornton, a 28-year-old from Texas who was 6 months pregnant when she tragically lost her life. So, Alcala ran into Thornton in San Antonio back in August 1977, and then he supposedly left her body on a ranch in Granger, Wyoming. She was killed by strangulation. They found Thornton's body back in 1982, but it took over 30 years to figure out who she was. They finally discovered who she was in 2014, when DNA connected her to her sister. Her family spotted a photo of her among several that the Huntington Beach Police Department released back in 2010, after Alcala received his death sentence. They discovered the images in a storage locker in Seattle that belonged to the killer. Investigators think Alcala is responsible for the deaths of Thornton in Sweetwater County. They base this on a photo that shows her alive in what looks like a remote public area northeast of Granger, not far from where her remains were discovered. Alcala died of a heart attack at a hospital in Kings County on July 24, 2021 at the age of 77 while awaiting execution on California's death row. People think he might have around 50 to 130 victims, but the actual number is still a mystery. Tammy Alexander's murder. On November 10, 1979, a passing driver stumbled upon something pretty shocking in a cornfield. It was about 20 feet off Route 20, not too far from the intersection with Route 5 in Caledonia, New York, just a half-mile away. A young girl, somewhere between 13 and 19 years old, was found. She was shot twice, but there were no sign of any sexual assault. So, the post-mortem revealed that she was shot in the head with a .38 caliber handgun, then dragged into a cornfield and shot in the back. A waitress at a little diner in Lima, New York, recalled spotting a young girl with a white guy around 5'8", wearing black wide-rimmed glasses and a tan shirt. He was cruising in a tan station wagon with some side paneling. Many truckers asked about the young girl trying to catch rides with them to Boston at the truck stops. In the end, the girl known as Caledonia Jane Doe was buried without any identification, leaving no clue about who she was or who might have done this to her. Fast forward 35 years to January 26, 2015, and the mystery of Caledonia Jane Doe's identity was finally cracked. They figured out that she was 16-year-old Tammy Jo Alexander. So, on November 3, 1979, Tammy disappeared from Brookfield, Florida. She was last spotted the day after she turned 16. Her case file doesn't say much, just that she was reported missing and thought to have run away. So, Tammy's high school friend, who hadn't been in touch for years, filed a missing person report because they were worried and wanted to find her. So when she finally looked into it, she discovered that Tammy had run away years back. And get this, her mom, who was deep into drug addiction, didn't even bother to report her missing. So, one of the classmates shared her concerns with the police, and they quickly figured out that Tammy was Caledonia Jane Doe. So, the hunt for Tammy's killer is still on and going strong.